You feed your lectures to ChatGPT or Claude and ask it to come up with questions so you can practice. Well, it turns out the questions it comes up with may not be as good as the ones your professor writes. In a new preprint, the authors built a workflow where a large language model takes a lecture transcript, identifies a set of core topics, and generates questions for each one. So this is a bit more complicated than posting a transcript into a chat window and asking for 20 questions. It's purpose-built pipeline with steps specifically designed to get better output than you would get by hand. They then ran this across 12 lecture transcripts from an introductory clinical psychology course at the University of Bern, and then randomly sampled 20 of the generated questions. For comparison, they took 20 human-written questions, the actual multiple choice questions used in that course's end of semester exam. 109 university lecturers in clinical psychology were then shown all 40 questions in random order. They weren't told where any of them came from. Their task was to read all 40 and select the 20 they thought most suitable for a university exam. Then they saw the same 40 items again, this time told that some of them had been generated by AI and some written by humans, and they were asked to judge the origin of each one. On average, lecturers chose about 9 out of 20 large language model questions, slightly fewer than the human ones, but close. And they correctly identified the origin of only 57 of the questions. So the large language model items were competitive with human ones in the eyes of the people who would actually be using them, though the researchers' test for statistical equivalence didn't quite pass the test. In a second study, 336 students in an Introduction to Psychology course completed 3 assessments based on 3 lessons. Each assessment mixed instructor written and questions written by a large language model. On the human written items, students scored 70%. On the ones by the large language model, they scored 87%. The researchers also modeled how well each item separated stronger students from the weaker ones, what psychometricians call item discrimination. The large language model items discriminated less than the human ones. Notice that the two findings aren't really independent. When 87% of students get an item right, there's barely any variation left for the item to separate anyone. A question almost everyone answers correctly can't tell you much about who understood the material. So the questions the instructors wrote were better at telling apart the students who had learned the material from those who hadn't. Too bad that the two studies use different items. Nobody rated the items that students answered 87% correctly, and nobody administered the items that lecturers picked 45% of the time. So we can't really claim that lecturers can't spot a weak question, as the title of the paper implies. Thanks for watching.